Today we're going to talk about making bread. I've been requested to make a video of how we make Grandpa's bread, as it's affectionately known around here. This is a process that's very simple, very forgiving, and almost foolproof. This is not going to be a Peter Reinhardt video. There's lots of good resources, him included, on the internet, on YouTube and so on. But this is my own process that I've developed from reading all these guys, or a lot of them, and practicing for about 20 years. This is not going to be a perfect recipe, but it's a place to start. Because it's very forgiving, you can experiment with it and find out what really works for you. Now there's going to be 4 parts to this video. The first part, we're going to do an overview of the whole process. Then we're going to do a video on how to measure and mix the ingredients. Then we're going to show you how we do the stretch and fold process. And then we're going to bake it. There's simple ingredients here. There's only 4. There's bread, flour, yeast, salt, water, and some options if you want it. Now I mentioned bread flour. Actually, the flour we're going to use can be bread flour, which is a high protein flour. A lower protein flour works also. I don't think I'd use cake flour because you'd end up with kind of a soft, mushy bread. But an all-purpose or a bread flour works just fine. The yeast is also pretty forgiving. I tend to use instant yeast, and we'll show you that stuff in a little bit. And a little bit of salt, water, and the options I'm talking about are things like Kalamata olives or raisins, that sort of thing. In fact, in this demonstration, I plan to show a little bit of how we do that. The tools we use are also important. We have to have an oven or some kind of a heat source, preferably one that gets up pretty hot. Normally I do my baking about 500 degrees. We have to have a bowl to mix it in, and we'll use just a simple container that we got, I think, at Costco or someplace. I use a pan that's made for making baguettes in it. You can use any old pan that you want for baking. Even the Dutch oven works pretty well. We're going to need a scale. My process calls for a scale, and we'll have a bit more to talk about that in a minute. And then some kind of a mixing tool. A spatula works just fine. I've used it for years. I'm going to show you a tool that I got off the internet. It's an old-fashioned tool that works good for mixing, particularly mixing dry ingredients. Now, why a scale? There's lots of recipes around that use just volume measurements. A cup of this, a cup of that, 2 cups of water, that sort of thing. The problem with that is it's not necessarily very repeatable. Flour, for instance, can be packed or loose, and the volume of the flour that you get in the cup can vary greatly in weight. Weight, on the other hand, is a precise measurement. Same thing goes for ice. For water. We're going to have a percentage of the flour that we're going to mix and called for water. And sometimes we like to have that water really, really cold, so we add some ice to it. If you tried to measure the volume of that with the ice in it, it'll measure way higher than the actual weight. But if you use the weight, it's going to come out pretty good. Let's see, I got some notes here. Now, the process we're going to use is we're going to mix it dry, the dry ingredients. Then we're going to add the water and mix it very thoroughly again. And then we're going to let it rise. Now, this can be a short time, a medium time, or a long time. let's say 4 hours, overnight, or most of a week. It's your choice. The one thing I will say is that the longer you let it rise, and this is in relatively cold conditions, but the longer you let it rise, the more of a kind of a sourdough taste will happen in the dough. Then we're going to put it on either a wet or a dry surface, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the stretch and fold video. And you stretch and fold the stuff, and this is actually kind of an option. There's a lot of the no knead bread so-called procedures that don't use any kind of kneading at all. But I like to stretch and fold it just a couple times around, watching the gluten develop, and it's a good feeling on the hands, and you get a feeling for what your bread should be doing. Then we'll shape it. Oh, and by the way, at that point in time, when you're folding it, is a good time if you're going to put some options into it, like Kalamata olives or raisins. You can do it at that time, and it works pretty well. Then we'll shape the loaves. We may stretch and fold each one individually again. That's kind of how you feel at the time and how the bread feels. And then we'll put it into whatever container we're going to cook it in, bake it in. As I said, I use baguette pans, and we'll show you that. And we actually use some parchment paper on the pans to support the baking process. We'll go ahead and preheat the oven to a very high temperature. Like I said, I use 500 degrees, and we'll show you how we preheat the oven in a couple of steps. And we do that while the loaves are proofing in their shape that they're going to be in when they're baked. And I'll show you how we add steam to the oven. We put a container of water in the bottom of it while it's the second part of preheating, and that will add some steam to the interior of the oven. We'll bake it. In the midway through the baking process, we'll turn the loaves around so they bake evenly. Ovens are notoriously bad for having hot spots and cold spots, and by moving it around a little bit, gets a chance to get an even heating process, even baking process. Then we'll let it rest for a little bit when it comes out of the oven to firm up, and that should be an hour or two, really. Some people will refuse to cut their bread until it's cold. That's probably the hardest part of this whole bread making process, is waiting for the time when you can cut into it and enjoy the bread. So that's what we're going to do. As I said, we're going to make 4 videos. One, this one, followed by one that shows you how we mix it. Then we're going to show you the stretch and fold process. Then we're going to show you the baking process. So I hope you enjoy these videos.